I think our audience started to connect. So hello everybody and welcome to the last session of the PubMet conference, the topic of which is publishing in lockdown, responses and consequences. And when it comes to publishing in lockdown, I hope that at least somebody managed to write and read something meaningful during the downtime. I will now ask our first speaker, Miha Kovač, who is a professor at the Department of Library Information Science and Book Studies at the University of Ljubljana, to begin with his presentation. Miha, feel free to share the screen and go.
Okay. I'm a great fan of multilingualism, so my presentation is actually in 3 languages. I'm thinking in Slovenian, as part of the slides are in Croatian and part in English. But I will do my talk with in English with strong Slovenian accent, as you can daily follow it if you listen to what is saying Melania Trump, for example. Together with my colleague at the University of Vilnius, Arunas Gudinavičius, we did a short survey among the publishers in small European countries in May this year, in which we asked them what is going on in their respective markets with book sales and with sales of ebooks and audiobooks. We defined a small market on a very broad way. We considered a small market any market that has less than 10 million inhabitants and is similarly economically and culturally developed. In other words, we basically picked up the countries in European Union plus Iceland. We sent the questionnaire around sometime in mid-May this year, which what was in most countries in that time during the lockdown. But as it is an unhappy habit among publishers, we didn't get so many replies. Actually, we got enough filled-in questionnaires from 4 countries, from Slovenia, Lithuania, Iceland, and Slovakia, that the sample was representative enough. In other words, around 40% of all members of Iceland Publishers Association replied, 47 from Lithuania, 12 from Slovakia, and 16 from Slovenia. And the answers, the results which we got were similar, but also to an extent different. But before I say a few words more about the findings, let me say a few simple things about these 4 markets. Iceland is the smallest one with 360,000 inhabitants. The turnover of the market is 16.2 million euros, and they publish 4.5 titles per thousand inhabitants. In Lithuania, the turnover of the market is around 80 million euros. They have 2.8 million inhabitants, and they published 3,075 titles in 2018, or 1.1 title per million. And in Slovakia has 5.5 million inhabitants, and in 2018 they published almost 10,000 new titles, and the turnover of the market is 110 million, and they have 90 members of the Slovak Publishers Association. In Slovenia, we have around 2.1 million inhabitants, and we published around 3,300 new titles, or 1.6 per million, and the turnover of the market is 65 million euros. As you can see, these markets, these turnovers of the market don't correspond arithmetically with the size of the population, and that's of course because the basically two factors: the level of living and the price levels in these countries are very much different. In other words, the books in Iceland are much more expensive than, for example, the books in Slovakia. What makes Slovak market in terms of turnover relatively small in comparison to Icelandic book market. We basically asked, we didn't ask for financial turnover in this survey. We wanted to figure out what is going on with number of copies sold in all these 4 countries. And when we look in general in all 4 countries, as if we look to these 4 markets as one market, as it is in this graph here, it's very obvious that in all markets the sales of the books in the times of lockdown went down. What is of course logically, and it was practically expected, because the shops, the bookstores were closed, the other shops which sell books were closed, and as a consequence only online sales were up and running. If we look at these countries separately, what we see that there were significant differences among these 4 countries. For example, the biggest drop in sales in these 4 countries was in Slovenia, where about more than 80% of the surveyed of the publishers who responded to the survey answered that the drop was between 40% and 100%. And the lowest drop, on the other hand, was in Slovakia, where about half of the publishers reported a little bit less than 40% drop in sales. And Lithuania and Iceland are somewhere in between. The reasons for these differences are quite different. In Slovenia, for example, the main reason for this drop is a high, very important role of bookstore sales channel and of megastore sales channel, while on the other hand, Slovakia has quite, in comparison to Slovenia and Lithuania, has very significantly developed online sales, which were up and running all the time during the lockdown. Additional interesting issue between Lithuania and Slovenia, for example, was the fact that public libraries in Lithuania were buying books regularly during the lockdown. It was also a kind of a gesture which was supposed to help the publishers, while in Slovenia public libraries closed down and there was no money for purchase of the books. And here we are talking, of course, about good old-fashioned printed books. When we looked at the ebook market in these 4 countries, we practically find out that this market is more or less non-existent. It was only, I mean, one of our assumptions when we started to do this survey was that e-book sales will go up during the lockdown, because e-books were all the time available, regardless of the lockdown. But the majority of publishers in this time reported no significant impact on sales, or very small impact on positive impact on sales. But majority of them, more than half, don't publish ebooks in these 4 countries. Here, on the other hand, rather surprisingly, the country with the highest highest sales of e-books, with relatively high sales of e-books was Slovenia, because of the online system which supports libraries, and this was the only part of the library system which was working, and libraries were bought quite a few licenses for loans of ebooks. In audio, again, the market is even more non-existent than in ebooks. The main reason for this is, of course, the main reason why the audiobook is non-existent is that there is no sustainable business model in all these 4 countries for ebook, for audio, namely in majority of big markets. The audio model is based on subscription, but the subscription model works effectively only when it generates enough turnover that allows production of audiobooks. And in these 4 countries, nobody dares to go into this, because the economic projections are showing that the financial loss would be way too high. We repeated the survey just 2 weeks ago, and we got even less useful answers to the questionnaire. We asked very simple question: what do you plan to do in next year? And we got a significant number of answers only from Lithuania and Slovenia. And here we can see quite interesting differences in national characters in these 2 countries. Slovenians, which you can see here in the left, plan to publish more or less the same number of titles, while Lithuanians are much more experimental. About half of the publishers who replied to the survey will change the number of titles. Some of them will go, about half of those will enlarge the number of titles, what means that they see the corona situation, the post-corona situation, or the second wave corona situation as a kind of a business opportunity, while in the other hand, about half of this who replies see this corona situation as a kind of a threat. It's worth remembering these surveys and compare. It will be worth comparing this to the situation in a year. To sum up, what did we find out? What we think is the most interesting are the most interesting findings, which are at the same time quite expected findings. The performance of the book market in the times of Corona was heavily dependent on the previously developed online book sales. In other words, more the online sales were developed, bigger were the sales. And we also find out that audio and e are not important in this market. As a matter of fact, we bumped into a few interesting developments in some of the small markets. For example, in Estonia, when the theaters were closed, the information which we got was that many actors were reading ebooks during the lockdown, but this kind of development didn't occur in other countries. It remains to be seen how the publishers will react to this, but the sustainability of the business model, of the subscription business model for e and audio, remains the biggest issue for the future. We also, I think we can say that we faced a certain amount of optimism about the future in all the markets which we surveyed. What remains open and what our survey didn't tackle, but these are definitely the questions which will need to be asked is what kind of impact had COVID-19 had on public libraries. At least in Slovenia, we see now quite interesting development in the way that book sales in bookstores in July, June, August and September are better than at the same time last year, whilst the library loans are lower. And one of possible explanations for this could be that people don't want to touch the books which seems to go through many hands before they get into their hands. And the other possible explanation might also be that, but this requires additional research, that public libraries were too passive in trying to communicate with users during the lockdown. Another issue which we don't know is what kind of impact has the pandemic on reading habits. There is some anecdotal evidence that people were reading more. There is some anecdotal evidence that people were reading less, but no significant or no serious. I don't know for any serious survey that would try to figure out what people were really doing during the lockdown. And of course, as we are walking as a continent, as each single country into a new recession, the big issue is what will happen in next 12 months. But I don't want to speculate about this. We know that recessions and economic crisis have different impacts on book reading. The last economic crisis showed that there was no positive impact on book reading, what makes a difference to previous economic crisis. And this next one will be a nice test whether the findings from the previous economic crisis were an anomaly or a new normal. Thank you. That's all what I intended to say.
Well, thank you for the interesting presentation. I think, given our previous discussion, that we might first discuss and ask questions about your presentation, of which I have received none from the audience yet. So if the audience has any questions, please feel free to post them now. But what I found interesting is that there was no increase in e-book sales during the lockdown. So do you think this is purely because the size of the market, or maybe another explanation is?
Well, there was a small increase. I mean, some publishers who do it faced increase, but my guess is that the whole ebook market is just too small to be able to significantly grow, because what matters in ebook markets is the number of titles. If there is only 100 titles, then such market is not attractive in comparison to print book markets where we have thousands of titles. So I think the main reason is just the small size of the market. Mm-hmm. The reason why, for example, audio was not growing is also the way how people use this. I mean, because people use audio basically when they commute to work or when they do some work which doesn't require full concentration. But as during the lockdown there was no commuting, then the use of audio went down. That's at least what was going on in more developed markets. And I assume it was the same reason also in our small markets. But as I said, the availability of audiobooks is even much smaller than the availability of ebooks, and I assume this is the main reason why there was no significant growth.
Okay. And we got a question to move on to larger markets. There is a question from the audience saying, are you aware of any similar service for large EU markets?
Oh yes. There was quite a few surveys done in UK. We did our survey with the help of Federation of European Publishers. who also did our own survey. And right now, at this very moment, I should be sitting in another conference which deals with these issues. And as far as I can see, the findings were it's very difficult to, we cannot say that Europe acted the same, European book markets acted in the same way in this crisis. The differences were quite high and quite local, but majority of the markets, as far as I could see, faced a growth after the lockdowns ended in sometime in May or in June. So locking down the people has a positive effect after the world reopens again. And it's, as I said, there are a few theories why it is so, but we should observe and think more what are the reasons for this. It's too early to say anything definitely now.
Mm-hmm. So we're breaking new ground in a way.
Yeah.
Okay, so there seem to be no more questions from the audience. So we're moving on to our next, last, but definitely not the least or the most calm of speakers, Zoran Velagić, who is a professor of book history and publishing studies at the University of Osijek, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. Zoran, would you please share your screen and start the presentation?
Okay, I've shared the screen. If you can see it, so we can start. Well, first of all, thanks to the organizers for the interest in this topic. What I'd like to present, the idea dates back to the January of this year. And if I remember well, my first talk to Professor Stoyanovsky about possible contribution to the conference dates back to the April of this year. So already in April, we had such a big load of links concerning what's going on with publishing and book selling industries in lockdown that we consider it worthy to present at the conference. From April on, the bill is rising and rising, and right now the biggest issue is how to sort all the news and infos and facts that somewhere appeared about publishing industry, and how to make some sense about what is really important and what can give some idea about the important developments and what are just thoughts of of people who are interested in the topic. In very short, this research could be described as meta-analysis of lockdown news from publishing and book selling industries. As I told, the idea dates back to January and the very beginning of February of this year. When, if I remember correctly, when the first book fair was postponed, at the Publishing Studies program in Osijek, together with 20 and something students, we decided to collect all the data that will appear somewhere about the reactions of the publishing industry, publishers themselves, authors, and all interested parties on the influence of pandemics to the publishing. So we made groups and we started to follow news on dedicated portals, such as Publishing Perspectives, Beyond the Book, Guardian Books, New York Review of Books, Scholarly Kitchen, Digital Reader, and so on. A few groups followed websites of publishers, booksellers, and fairs. If you would follow, and I do believe all of us are following, for example, Frankfurt Book Fair website, so you can see that the expectations are changing still week after week, and also the mail newsletters. So what we wanted to do is to make a database of the events for perhaps some further research, because we thought in some future point of time, it could be pretty interesting to have enough material which will show how publishers tackled the pandemic together with colleagues from booksellings and so on. So that would be for the beginning, and at the end of the presentation I'll speak about the obstacles and problems, and there are also many of them in reaching conclusions that would make sense that we already had a chance to see in Miha's speaking what is coming out from the research they conducted. So after we made all this link database, and if the database is under the marks, then you can understand that this is not a real database, but rather really a sort of Excel and Word documents with a list of everything that appeared in these 8 or 9 months. When we try to make some sense out of it, it appeared that we can make some chronology, and immediately dominant topics jumped out. So when we speak about chronology in reactions, the first one was the one of confusion. This one dates back to January and February, and partly to March. In the middle of March, we could spot first, let me say, clever reactions of publishing and bookselling industry to what's happening on. We could see first signs of consolidations, and we could also see some plans for the following months, which were supposed somehow to make all the situation easier. And the last was after the lockdown, this strange summer situation when many expectations rised up, when part of the industry expected that from autumn on everything is going to be as before, but mostly the ideas were that the further projects will be a sort of hybrid projects which will combine contact and online. Or as we can, yesterday, I have to share it with you because yesterday for the first time I've heard about the online teaching and offline teaching. So that's very, very interesting how the new terminology always impact the old practices. So the next slides will be based and structures according to this chronology. Among dominant topics, as we said, most we could read about what has happened to physical events and spaces. Mostly we could read about the cancellation and postponements of different events, and reorganization of works and workspaces, and also closing of bookstores. Then immediately at the beginning of March, we could read how the scientific publishing, mostly journal publishing, of course, reacted to the appearance of COVID crisis. Then there were many articles about the possibilities of free ebook access, about working from home, and most interesting for me, about reading at home. And then there will be some direct links to what Miha had said just before. So this first phase about confusion, I think that we all remember this first phase, and it could be again separated in 2 little phases. In February, we could read about the postponements of events, but in March, we started with cancellation. The example is Bologna book fair and exhibition of children publishing, which was first postponed until May and then later on cancelled. London was cancelled only in March, but after many crucial players from Random House and so on pulled out. And then after that, it was a sort of domino effect with Leipzig, New York Book Expo, New York Write Fairs, different book awards, Hay Literature Festivals, and so on and so forth. And later on, I'll come back to Frankfurt as the most important for us. But already at this place, I would just like to point out that still in industry, there is no solution for physical events. There is a very interesting story about Frankfurt. First, they wanted to have physical exhibition. Then later on, they told, okay, no physical exhibition, but let's go with some physical programs. And then last week, the latest news is about not even any programs. All Frankfurt goes online as well, which shows exactly how the publishing industry is open to all different measures and restrictions which are connected with COVID situation. Then, when we look at the first reaction, I think regarding the general topic of this conference, the most important would be how. Okay, it will finish quite soon. The most important was how the scientific publishing reacted to appearance of COVID. And there is one subtitle from by the book podcast, behind the book podcast, which says, "Has there ever been a time when academic research received more attention than now?" At the end of this slide, there is more about it. But let us first say that as early as March 11, Scholarly Kitchen reported that most journals from the fields of biomedic and clinical research committed resources to rapid peer review and production of papers related to COVID-19. So they wanted to participate, they wanted to give a sort of their contribution. And together with this, from March on, we could read about free access to all COVID research in some important databases. My informations are that first are coming from Sage and Emerald, later from others. Perhaps that's not exactly correct, but it's not so important. And it was always for limited period. For example, for 3 months. Emerald now has opened it until the end of the year if something is not changed meanwhile. But then very soon again it appeared that open access is although it's called open, very expensive. And from August the 4th, again, there is very smart contribution in Scholarly Kitchen, which says, okay, who's going to pay the open access? Mostly universities are supposed to pay, but in such economic situation where students are not enrolling the universities, would it be enough money to really keep open research, open access research on such a high level as it was supposed? And what is extremely interesting in this situation, and harking back to these subtitles that I mentioned at the beginning of this slide, the question was, is it there finally the broader audience for science? Is it now finally that the broader audiences, publicity people, want something that is quality and trusty news against all this fake news, against all these fake health advices and so on? But according to some opinions, and I think that they could be pretty much correct, general public is not satisfied with the slowness of science. Science is very, very slow for media standards, and when public expects something new, science cannot provide new things in more a month or two. So that's also sometimes the explanation why there is so many different opinions and also the fake news regarding to this COVID appearance. Then among the consolidations, there is another arrangement of work, or call it remote workforce, or working from home. Macmillan was among the first publishers who from March the 16th sent the employees back home and asked them to work from home and not to come to the offices. A day after that, again, one very, very smart contribution appeared talking about challenges of working from home. So do we have proper working environment? I was delivering what is called today classic teaching in virtual environment. So I was teaching using different systems, and then during the lecture I wanted to make a point, you know, and I told my students, okay, now listen to me, we are going to make the point of all this lecture, and then poodle start barking because some other dog was barking on the street. So you can imagine the suitability of this working environment for really delivering some serious lectures. Usual questions about connections tools, then the questions about now how are we going to separate our private sphere from the professional sphere when we speak about first space, second space, the third space, and so on. Now everything is lost. We don't have first, third, and then second space anymore if we do everything in this way. And do we have the proper mindset for different life routine? Do we have enough personal discipline to work from home? You know, are we ready really to spend 6 or 8 hours without in completely different environment and work about this? Okay, that was mostly this second reaction to the COVID, and perhaps the most interesting about the reading. Miha showed very direct findings about the publishers and publishers' thoughts about the ebooks and free ebooks access. And here I would like to point out 3 things that we found in this meta-analysis. First, the reaction of Kobo Italy and Gruppo Mondadori, who provided access to more than 5,000 free ebooks on March 11. And then the reaction of Macmillan, who dropped embargo on new releases of ebooks, again for limited periods, via library borrowing on March 20. So that were first reactions where publishers wanted somehow to fill newly opened free time with ebooks. And we have also the data from libraries of the city of Zagreb, which says that ebook borrowing after the lockdown and after the closure of physical libraries has doubled. And in average 85 titles were borrowed per day, and they even have statistic about the genres, which is really very interesting and nothing that we wouldn't expect. Most of these titles were romances, crime novels, and self-help. The results were published at the T-portal. So there was intention to provide the ebooks, but what about reading? Okay, just one more slide about the marketing reactions to pandemic. Reading assumption was that now finally people have enough time to read. Again, the question whether in full house, and publishers and the elites in this moment really, as you can see from these commercials, promoted escapist reading. Now more than ever we need escape to some another words, distanced with book, united in reading, and so on. Be it safe with a good book. So be it safe, read good book, because we need window to some another word. But what was really with reading? I'll jump over this slide. Nothing important. According to news, people didn't read for pleasure. Not people read in this escapist sense. Scholarly Kitchen reported that what people are reading at their portal is connected with is pandemic related. Out of 10 most read articles, 8 are pandemic related. And then Publishing Perspectives published on July 16 the findings of the research by Italian Association of Publishers, which is conducted every year. And according to their findings in Italy, that was at this time the most struck country by the pandemic in Europe, pandemic in fact decreased book reading. They even says that so they made a research for the entire year and then at the end asked questions for March and April. 50 people read at this time. The average was 60 before pandemics. They spent less than an hour. Those who are reading spent less than an hour reading a book per day. They spent around 60 minutes on TV, phone, WhatsApp, and so on. But look now, 47% of non-readers told that they don't have time for reading in lockdown. So they're preoccupied with other things. Exactly, we thought, you know, now people finally have time to see it, to be at home and read. But 47 say, no, we didn't have time. 35% say we don't have physical space to concentrate on reading in our houses. 33% said we are too much worried about the entire situation to enjoy any time of reading. And what I think is also very important and goes in line with this scholarly kitchen report is 32% said that news consumption actually replaced book reading. So what people wanted were news, what's going on, and not the book reading. So that was exactly the most important finding out of this research. And then at the end, just a few words about the consolidation and what is new normal. Of course, there were many news about the reopening of bookstores and libraries, and about the support for publishing industry. Where, for example, Conte government awarded 10 million euros to small publishers in Italy. There are examples from other countries in Europe. Then again, organizers of festivals try to do it in a sort of a hybrid way. Just last week, Fraktura, Croatian publishing house, had Festival of World Literature. It was partly managed as physical events, partly online, partly on national TV, exactly as Frankfurt Book Fair wanted. But as I told at the beginning, during the summer, there was an idea to have Frankfurt as it always was. And on September the 8th, they had 800 exhibitors registered for this year. But then one day after that, the new logo, the new Parola was all together now on air in the city at the fair, but without book exhibitions, but with different live programs, promotion of literature and so on. And 3 days after that, it was no physical events for 2020, showing vulnerability, in fact, of such events to ongoing crisis. So that's in fact the most important I wanted to show you. As I told, we have thousands of links, and it's pretty much difficult to make sense out of it. What are the limits? The limits are that every meta-analysis is second-hand information, especially in this sense when you are analyzing not scientific facts but the news. It could be that what is the most interesting for media is not necessarily the most interesting for the industry, and the only way out is to make the research with publishers, as Miha did. Then really we are all tending to interpret the news according to our experience. Sometimes we think the way we behave, everyone else is behaving. And we have another problem that I may be wrong, but I can see from my own perspective, that is a sort of tyranny of the research. How many different research, how many different interviews you were asked and surveys you were asked to fill out during this pandemic related to how do we behave during the pandemic? I have 30 or 40 of them. You know, and it is really a sort of tyranny. And now, so we should be very, very careful when we do the research of something that is ongoing. And when we make a conclusion with something that is ongoing, because concerning all developments, it's not finished exactly as Miha said before. And 2 slides with the future, something that was many interesting for me. Some professionals predict new pandemic, which will follow, that is pandemic of bad writings about the COVID-19. So we will see how many people will write about it. But let's make it much more serious. What is obvious that we don't have effective crisis management in publishing, book selling, and entire book ecosystem, which will and which can effectively deal with situation as the global pandemic, as the global financial crisis, even as some global disruption in the workforce, as we had at the beginning of this millennia, and so on. And if we think that, if we believe that reading is important, perhaps we should pay more attention and somehow dedicate more time to think about such effective crisis management. So thank you very much. That would be all for the moment.
Thank you, Zoran, for this quite interesting presentation. And we have some questions from the audience. The first is, did you consider Twitter as a valuable source of information?
We collected, one group collected information for Twitter, and the info are in the database, but I tried to make sense out of them, and it's so difficult really that they were not included in this presentation. But there is one more thing, info and news, they're repeating. And according to my experience in this last few months, what you can find in some dedicated podcasts and portals, and what you can find in publishers' websites would be a sort of most important. We followed all the how they say, social platforms that publishers use when communicated. So we followed Twitter and we followed Facebook pages of publishers as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. And moving on. So is this opening of the content of ebooks we see temporary, or can we expect more permanent openness?
That's the question that should be, publishers should be addressed with this question. The pattern is they open access for 3 months. Most of them did it for 3 months. Emerald has announced that it's open until the end of the year. But for sure, it's not going to be open permanently for the sake of pandemic research.
Okay. Another question is, did you find any news reporting an increase in book publishing?
No. No.
So that was simple.
No,
okay.
I didn't. I didn't.
News reporting was perhaps more interested in other things during the pandemic. Not all of them good.
As I told exactly in limits, what is the most interesting for media is not necessarily the most important process in industry. And that's why this question is extremely important. Does, in fact, pandemic has any influence on book production? Because publishing plans are made in advance. So it could have impact or it couldn't have impact. It had, well, we could read about the reorganization of the workflow, but I really don't have any good information about the increase in book production, and that should be something that if we want to find more about it, we should make more research as the first presented in this session.
Okay. Also, in your opinion, did people change their attitudes towards ebooks and other digital book formats because of the lockdown?
Could you repeat, please?
So in your opinion, did people change their attitudes towards ebooks and other digital book formats because of the lockdown?
Well, the attitude is very wide. I'm not sure what is considered under attitude. For sure, in lockdown, ebook is easy getting book. It's much easier to get to the ebook than to the print book. And as we saw, Macmillan is one of the most interesting publishers in this lockdown situation. I mentioned them twice. I think that they had perfect management for this situation. I think that John Sargent was their manager for all this, and he reacted with with moving the embargo on ebooks. So if this is the question, I think yes, there is a global awareness that what is online you can get it, and what is under some physical limits of access you can't get it. But if the question is do we finally now realize that the ebook is better, then of course my answer would be neither ebook nor pbook are better, because they can't be compared in this way.
Okay. And the last question we have from the audience is quite cunning, really. It says, how do you interpret the sudden opening of huge previously closed silos by content providers? Is it pure altruism that often manifests itself in crisis situations? Or would you associate a temporary opening with a business strategy of attracting new readers, customers, and/or customers? So is this opening due to altruism in the crisis situation, or is it a business strategy of getting new customers?
May I answer the simple question? Because I don't know the answer, but I would say both.
Would you mind if I add something here?
Of course.
Please.
Yeah. Well, I think it all depends on business model, because all these companies are private companies which are financed with the money which they get from the market. And if they have a kind of a subscription model which is based on yearly revenues, then there is no problem to open the content for 2 or 3 months to general public, because the cash is already in. So I see this move as a kind of a pure marketing gesture, and as a kind of an economic experiment. I'm, for example, following now in Slovenia one of the educational publishers who opened all their digital content in March and April for free without problems, because they cashed all the revenues previous year by the end of by the beginning of school year. And now with new school year, they have around 30% of more users who are paying for the usage. So this COVID was actually an opportunity for quite big marketing experiment for many publishers. But of course, they cannot open their content for free for all the time, because they would go bankrupt.
Okay. Zoran, would you like to add anything?
Well, yeah, I agree. Altruism was always part of marketing. You can say it in this way, but you can't prove it, you know. So to make something good only because of I don't know. Well, it's now. It could be a beautiful panel. In fact, when we will speaking about motives, it's very, very difficult to speak about motives. I don't know your motives. You don't know my motives. Marketing is 95% beyond opening databases, but there is still, I would say, this 5% which are something more. That's my opinion. Someone could argue that there is 95% of altruism and only 5% of marketing, I believe.
Perhaps, in my opinion, using altruism and marketing in the same sentence is a bit off. But there is an interesting, moving on to the previous discussion, did people change their attitudes towards ebooks during lockdown? We have an interesting comment I would just like to read. It says, for example, students at University of Zagreb School of Medicine did not use e-textbooks before. During lockdown, they had no other choice, so they used them, and now they like them much more than before. So in a way, we did move into, people did start using new technologies and got used to them in a way. Now it depends.
Yeah, I have different experiences regarding print textbooks and e-textbooks, but there is one thing in common. If you have highly interested students and highly motivated students, then both P and e-book is good. If they are not interested, nothing can help, and that would be, in my experience, the basic criteria. So not exactly the format that the textbook appears, but more the motivation to use them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it has so much. I don't think it's so much connected with the platform or with the form of the book. I've never and I always speak against comparing P-books and e-books on this level of what is better, because they can't be compared in this way. E-book better fits in some environments and P-books better fits in some other environments. They're both very, very valuable, and we have really to promote reading of both, you know. Mm-hmm. But we really need to know what for. You know, it's to speak just that one is better than another one makes.
Well, it's a question of usage, not just what is better. But until we move to interactive content for textbooks, there is really no difference currently, I think. Okay, so I think that's all of the questions. And your favorite Harry, Zoran, your favorite Harry moderator doesn't have any questions of his own. But I did find the idea of tyranny of research and that the public perceives scholarly research as slow very interesting, but it's not directly tied to your presentation and would perhaps be better suited for a coffee, which we unfortunately won't have after this session.
Is it important if we have coffee right after the session or in a week?
Okay, I mean, we will argue then, I'm sure of it.
We have a deal.
Excellent. And unless there are any more questions, this is the end of this session. No more questions. So I think we are done. And this was the last session in the conference. And we are now moving on to the closing speech, which I think Jadranka will give. Are we doing this right? We want more. Yes. I would like more too, but it is Friday afternoon and the week has been quite tiring. So maybe we will have more in the private discussions. Are we moving, Jadranka, are we moving to the final speech?
Yes, Zoran, could you be so kind and unshare your screen?